Welcome to Comic Book Historians. I'm Alex Grand. Go ahead and click on that juicy red subscribe button down below. Now today we're talking about Tom Fagan and the Rutland Parade and how that's an interesting and early example of the proto-cosplay movement that is so popular in comic conventions today. Now, Tom Fagan was born in Rutland, Vermont in 1931, was employed by the Rutland Herald, and eventually went into publishing. He was a lover of pop culture and eventually co-created the Halloween Rutland Parade in 1960, which was a huge celebration of comic book fans wearing costumes of superheroes. As a lover of superhero comics, his parade promotions showed up in DC's Detective Comics 327, 1964, which describes that Batman makes an annual appearance in Rutland each year as a mystery-caped law-enforcing figure of the evening. This was the era of the beginnings of the New York Comic Con and the Detroit Triple Fanfare, and superfans Dave Kaler, Danny O'Neill, and Roy Thomas were heavily involved in communicating and reading letter updates like this in Rocket Blast Comic Collector 52, 1967. Roy Thomas joined Marvel Comics a year or so later, and we see that in Comic Crusader 8, 1970, Roy takes his ex-wife Jeannie and fellow comics writers like Glenn Wein and Marv Wolfman to the Rutland Parade, as well as to Tom Fagan's mansion that he house sat, and these photos are documented there. Now, according to the Comic Book Historians podcast interview with Roy Thomas, Tom Fagan would house sit a 24-room mansion in which he would use to host parties right before the Rutland Halloween Parade. In costume as Batman, Martin Grime and Bob Cosgrove as Yellow Jacket and the Fly. Couple more pictures of Martin and Bob. You got Andy Yanchus, and that's Marv Wolfman, and they're both portraying the Phantom Stranger and No Man. Al Bradford and Susan O'Neill were dressed up as Joker and Catwoman. Ellie Grime was the Wasp. You have Irene Vartnov and Dave Kaler at the party. Dave Kaler was there as Vigilante, and Yellow Jacket was standing there on the float during the parade. Now in Avengers 83, 1970, written by Roy Thomas, we have the Avengers meeting Tom Fagan at the Rutland Parade during Halloween. You see that Tom Fagan, instead of dressed up as Batman, is dressed up as Nighthawk, which was basically the Marvel version. As we can see, the Avengers actually hang out with Tom Fagan at the parade, which is crashed by Claw, with a Tom Fagan feeling like he is in over his head in the costumed adventurer world. You can see fun panoramics of the Avengers standing on the floats. You see Nighthawk there, and of course this would be the poses that Tom Fagan was making in his Batman costume at the time. There's also a nice close-up of Roy and his ex-wife Jean Thomas in Spidey and Susan Storm costumes at the parade, with Roy in a Spider-Man outfit like the previously shown photo, as well as the same one that he wore in the Fantastic Four annual. We have his wife Jean Thomas with a subtitle of Adorable Assistant. Now back to Rutland in Batman 237, 1971, we actually have Dick Grayson and friends looking on the Rutland Halloween Parade as portrayed by Neil Adams. Batman eventually makes it into Tom Fagan's house, and we see Tom himself in the Batman suit mentioned in the 1964 letters page, as opposed to the Nightwing costume from the Marvel book. We also see spoofs on Marvel costumes, with likely Roy in the back saying he is Webslinger Lad and a large fan in a Thor outfit. Marvel's Avengers 88, 1971 describes 5,000 spectators at the Rutland Parade, with marchers including the Black Panther, Scarlet Witch, Black Widow, Medusa, Wasp, Captain America, and Havoc to reenact the Roy Thomas written issue of Avengers 83 that took place there. Roy Thomas writes again about Tom Fagan and his wife Jeannie in Marvel Feature 2, 1972, where Tom gives them advice on ancient magics. In 1972, there are more photos of the Rutland Parade with Marvel and DC Comics writers shown in TCR, etc. fanzine by Paul Levitz. Here is Master of Ceremonies, Tom Fagan, again standing in front of a Steranko blow-up poster of Batman. We also see Tom Fagan in costume as Nighthawk at the parade. There is enough fun and interesting back and forth between Marvel and DC writers that would attend the Rutland Parade. 3 of them would come together and write an unofficial Marvel and DC crossover. These issues were Amazing Adventure 16, 1973 by Englehart, Justice League of America 104, 1972 by Len Wein, and Thor 207, 1973 by Jerry Conway. In Amazing Adventure 16 by Englehart, you see that Roy, Len, Glynis, and Jerry's car breaks down on the way to Tom Fagan's house while Beast is fighting Juggernaut. Juggernaut. The comic foursome makes it to the Rutland Parade, and a drained Juggernaut steals their car. Then in JLA 103 by Ween, their same purple car is broken down in the beginning, but they figure it out and drive to Tom Fagan's house and see Tom in his Batman suit, as they would join in on the Rutland Parade. In this case, a spiritually drained Felix Faust steals their car, implying that they are walking in between two worlds, and we are seeing mirror events. Thor 207 by Conway starts off with the parade as a mirror event to what we saw in JLA 103, with the comic foursome on the bottom right of the splash page. The comic foursome headed to Tom Fagan's house like they did in the JLA story, and we see this time that Tom Fagan is in his Nighthawk suit as opposed to the DC Batman. Now the comic foursome see Loki appear to jump to his death after Juggernaut stole their car, and they are left mystified as to what exactly happened here. But it seems that there was some interdimensional Nexus event that occurred as the first unofficial Marvel DC crossover. Tom Fagan makes his next appearance in Avengers 119, 1974, and Loki is still in the background, kinda googly-eyed still from the previous Rutland experience. Tom Fagan appears again in Thor 232, 1975, written by Jerry Conway, where he reports that was a kid hypnotized into fooling everyone that it was Loki, but it actually wasn't. Tom Fagan makes an appearance as Tom Sykes in Rutland Lakota in Gold Keys, The Occult Files of Dr. Spectre, written by Donald Glut, where Thor and Doctor Strange are seen in the background. Now, Tom Fagan and the Rutland Parade made their next appearance in Freedom Fighter 6, 1977, written by Bob Rozakis, as an epilogue where the action and conflict of the story didn't interfere with plans to proceed with the event. Again in the DC Universe, Tom Fagan pops back in Justice League of America 145 in 1977 by Steve Englehart as the JLA, including Batman, pop into Rutland, Vermont. Tom mentions it's not even time for the parade and wonders what mystery could be lurking around the corner. Now, Tom Fagan's mansion that he would house sit was haunted by events concerning Deadman and the Phantom Stranger in DC Superstars 18, 1978, written by Marty Pascal, and we have Jerry Conway, Marty Pascal, Paul Levitz, and Romeo Tangal all sitting there on the couch. They specifically mention Roy Thomas, Len Wein, and Denny O'Neil in the dialogue balloons. Now, Tom Fagan or the Parade did not appear in the next comic book featuring Rutland, which was in Ghosts 95, 1980, written by Paul Kupperberg, but there was still a ghost mystery to be solved by Terrence 13 at the local community playhouse. Now in What If 22, 1980, Mark Grunwald, editor as Uatu, the Watcher, remarked on Rutland, Vermont as an artificial nexus of realities. In their 100th issue of The Defenders in 1981, Doctor Strange, Submariner, and the Hulk find themselves in Rutland, Vermont, fighting hooded figures of Satanish, but there's no Tom Fagan nor the Halloween Parade. In Thunder Bunny 5, 1986, published by Warp Graphics, written by Martin L. Grime, has an older Tom Fagan with a more modern Rutland Parade, including Star Wars costumes, and ends with Tom in his traditional Rutland float Batman suit. Animal Man 50, 1992 by Tom Veitch, has some superhero deconstruction moments that take place in Rutland, Vermont, but with no parade nor any Tom Fagan sighting. In Generation X 22, 1996 has the Young Mutant Squad looking for Franklin Richards during the Rutland, Vermont parade, but with no Tom Fagan sighting. In Superboy and the Ravers 16, 1997, written by Steve Matson and Carl Kessel, has a superpowered rock band perform on All Hallows Eve in Rutland, Vermont to a costumed audience. Now, Tom Fagan eventually left the Rutland Parade and ultimately passed away in 2008. His legacy is cemented, however, in the Marvel and DC comics starting from 1970. Like many things in pulp culture, things start to seize once the 21st century starts off. A mega fan that made it into the comics that he loved very much, and starting what we would call the proto-cosplay movement that was the seedling for the huge cosplay movement that happens in conventions today. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Go ahead and click on that juicy red subscribe button down below. We have plenty of content coming to you all the time here at Comic Book Historians.